You know, a lot of men think they need the top 5 tips from the latest magazine article to have an alive and robust sexuality. I actually think there's a better way to accomplish that. Stick around to find out more.
Hello and welcome to the Something New Show. I'm your host, Jordan Linscombe. Today we're going to dive right into an amazing interview with author and therapist Sam Jolman. I'm so honored to have him here in the studio with us. Sam is not only a good friend, we've been in the same community for a long time, but really a well-renowned and respected therapist here in Colorado Springs. So thank you, Sam, for being on the show here today.
Jordan, it's great to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So Sam just recently released a book called The Sex Talk You Never Got. And this is a phenomenal work. We're going to dive right into this topic and more of his work. I've so appreciated his writing. So if you're new to the show or you've been watching for a while, I want you to encourage you to stick around. We're going to peel back some layers of like, what does this topic mean? Why are we bringing this up? Because in our view, it's such a part of life, and it's part of a life worth celebrating, which is really our core theme here at the Something New Show. But real quick, Sam is a highly respected therapist and licensed professional counselor. He specializes in men's issues, marriage counseling, and sexual abuse recovery. He's had over 20 years of experience and walked with a lot of people through a broad range of issues. Bottom line, folks, he is very well respected in this community and beyond. He has a Master of Arts in Counseling from Reformed Theological Seminary in Orlando, Florida. He's trained in narrative-focused trauma care through the Allender Center at the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology, which is a well-respected program. And he has done wilderness trips for men as part of his past, and has a big heart for the outdoors and hunting, which I love. We'll unpack some of that. We both have a love for elk hunting and the beauty of Colorado. And then he and his wife, Amanda, have been married for 21 years and are raising 3 young men. And so I am just so honored and grateful to have him here. I've been following his writing, just chatting with him at school drop-offs here and there for years, but was so happy to see him bring together this work of The Sex Talk You Never Got. And so what I love about this is, you know, the ancient wisdom of the Bible tells us that God looks on the outside, the world looks on the outside, but God looks at the heart. And in a world of social media and influencers and all the people out there trying to take advantage of what does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be strong? What does it mean to be an influencer? I've got to tell you, people, that I have seen a lot of people come and go. You can see through some of the nonsense out there in this world. But Sam is a true man through and through, a man amongst men. And the reason, I think, is because he goes to the matters of the heart. And I so appreciate that about you, and I so respect that about you. And you really have had the courage to put together a writing that few people ever have, or no one ever has, to this level of professionalism. So again, I so appreciate that you're being here with us. And final thing is the foreword in the book is from John Eldridge, who I've really enjoyed going to his boot camp and other works. And John has literally said he would send his friends or his sons to Sam for doing work with them. So honored to have you. I really mean it. And let's just jump right in. Feel free to add any more of like your story or things that brought you to this point. But if we jump right in, you really start talking about that the most neglected part of a man's life is what? Like, unpack that for us. When we talk about this work, like, what is the most neglected part of a man?
Yeah, so, you know, the sex talk you never got. I didn't get a sex talk. It's such a common conversation I have with clients as a counselor, is how little sexuality was addressed in their life. There's this assumption sort of like it, I guess, is going to run itself, right? Like, you'll figure it out. And obviously there's a way in which that's true, but it's probably the place that men have had the least meaningful conversation in their life, even deeper than spiritual formation, right? You think about male spirituality as being a place that might be neglected, but, you know, maybe men got like a, you know, the birds and bees, you know, mechanics talk. How does it work? Or a purity lecture, or, you know, maybe worse, sex jokes, locker room talk, right? But as far as like meaningful conversation with other men or with their father about sexuality, it's just such a neglected area in most men's lives. And so they don't really know how to talk about their sexuality, is what I find when they come in for counseling, other than, am I behaving or not behaving? is kind of the one way they know to think about their life. Like, am I lusting or not lusting? But I think sexuality is such a place of struggle or suffering for men, not just in terms of their own sin, but just we tend to see, as I say in the book, men are very over-sexualized and under-sexually nurtured, meaning, this idea that, well, men just want sex. Just give them sex and they're good, right? Just give them food and sex and that's all they need. And all the romantic stuff and all the emotional stuff is for women, right? I mean, here we are in a bridal shop, right? And that sense that, that's all for women, not for men. But I have men, who come in all the time. In fact, I would say at some level, it's every man. Men want love. They want the emotional stuff. I have guys say it all the time, like, I feel like I'm more like the woman in the relationship because I actually want the connection and the heart of it. Men want and need more than sex, and we just don't have a category for that in the masculine world. And so men tend to suffer fairly silently when it comes to anything deeper than, are you getting some?
Right. Yeah, and speak to that, because you and I both have chosen to be followers of Jesus, and that has changed our lives and how we view the world and how we live our lives, how we honor our wives and our kids. But some guys don't understand that there is a God design in them to feel those emotions. So when guys have come and been on the couch, shared with you, like, I feel like the woman in the relationship, they might be misunderstanding, like, no, actually the God design in your heart.
Yes.
Also, it applies to you. Could you unpack that for us?
Yeah, so the biblical story, as I've reflected in writing this book, like, what are the pictures of the most virile men in the Bible, right? The most, like, sexually alive and virile men. I think of Adam in the Garden of Eden, right? The naked glory of Eden. I mean, there's no sin, there's nothing. It's perfection, right? And he meets Eve also in naked glory. And what does he first do, right? When he meets his mate, his partner, he breaks into poetry, right? And then obviously at some point they have children and their romance carries on. And
but it was like nothing he'd ever experienced before. Like,
yes,
the awe and the wonder,
yes,
went to a whole nother level.
Yes, and he's not saying, wow, I can't wait to have sex. He's saying, you're bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. He's breaking into poetry. He's honoring the connection that he's now had. Like, I'm not lonely anymore, right? I found my person. Or you think of Song of Songs, right? Another wildly erotic, text in the Bible. It's erotic love poetry at its heart. And again, it's not just a man talking about, getting some. It's a man breaking into poetry about his love. And obviously she's breaking into poetry back about them. But that poet lover is, I think, the image of a truly virile man, a man whose body and heart are in unison, right? There's a writer, Peggy Orenstein. She's a journalist who's done a ton of research on the sex culture of, like, the younger adult generation. She wrote a book, Boys and Sex, and then Girls and Sex. And she would say, after doing all of her research, her conclusion was, women need to connect to their bodies. Men need to connect to their hearts. If she could summarize all that's wrong in sexuality.
All the findings.
Men need to connect with their hearts. Women need to connect with their bodies. That was profound to me. This idea of, like, where's the heart of masculine sexuality? That poet lover, right? Again, back to, it can so easily become in a man's life, or in masculine culture, this getting some, or this, notch of, like, masculinity or achievement. Right. Well said.
Yeah. No, well, I bring that up because I think for a lot of guys, they hit a wall of, like, why do I feel so frustrated, or why do I feel empty, or I'm trying in a relationship or a marriage. But then we often don't realize, like, lean into the God design of feeling the feelings,
right?
Having those emotions, and listening to them. Yeah, we're all spirit, mind, and body, whether we like it or not. But, like, really stopping to live out the God design in our lives. So I love how you went into that, more in the writing.
It's not that women are more designed for relationship than men. That's wrong. There's not research that says men are less relational than women. even like brain structure. There's nothing that prevents a man other than socialization from being relational and connected. Men need it just as much as women.
So cultural perceptions,
Yeah.
it's evolved to that point. I love it too, because he even talked, I've got a ninth grader. He's playing football, and you get the whole element of like, man, why do guys love this, or contact sports and other things? And there's such a lack of physical touch for men or for boys in healthy ways, right? And so then people naturally gravitate, especially boys, towards contact sports or wrestling or all these things. And so what I love is you dive early in of like, let's just debunk some of the myths about you are designed to have a heart, without jumping too far ahead. Like, that's another aspect of it though too, is like you unpack that boys are scientifically, the studies show, touched less even from an early age.
Right.
Speak to that a bit.
Yeah. So Dr. Sue Johnson, she did a ton of research on adult attachment, meaning this idea that you don't outgrow your need for connection, relational connection. Your whole life, you need that. And so she was talking about how some research that she'd found that boys as a whole are touched less, are held less as infants than girls. So right from the start, we get this physical neglect, the affection neglect. And so she was talking about how, when she counsels a couple, and the wife is saying, gosh, my husband it feels like he wants sex all the time. She says, I would too, if it was the only other place I could get touch other than the football field in the masculine culture. Meaning, again, women have a greater culture of touch, or like hugging and affection and connection, right? That's like more just a part of their culture. And it's okay to be feminine and want those things, but to be masculine and want those things, right? It feels like you have to find the men that are also there, also connected to their heart, to be able to get that, right? As in terms of friendship, but then also in relationship. She's saying that, a lot of men, when they say, gosh, I really am craving sex, it might be what they're craving as connection or relationship or some deeper emotional connection. I tell a story in the book of a woman who said, I always knew what kind of day my husband had based on how he made love to me that night. And there were nights where I knew he had a hard day because I felt like the thing he had to conquer. I think about that story a lot of like, what would it have looked like if this man, and by the way, she said that did not feel good. He would tune her out, and it was all about this kind of conquest of like, I've got to, my day was terrible. It was futile, and I've got to conquer something, and it ends up being sex with my wife.
Win at something for the day.
Yeah, it's got to be my W. And, I think about that guy, like, what would it have looked like if he had said, like, can I just talk about my day, right? And, like, actually emotionally connected with his wife. It's probably what he needed, because I doubt that he actually felt better after even making love to his wife. Maybe physically his body felt a little better, but relationally?
Yeah, holistically.
Yeah. So it's honoring that, like, as a man, we have to come back to the category of you are a relational person. At your core, I'm not making that up. It's there. We just have to recover it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I bring that up because it's, like you said, it's unpacking the heart of the matter, is that men have a heart and an emotional need and capacity and design to live that out, but then also the physical connection and touch, right? As we jump into it, like in the book, you get into the whole topic, which is a hot topic in society, but like, is male sexuality fundamentally broken? Like, is it hopeless? Like with all the machismo and just the ads and the bombardment towards all of us as men and towards boys or anybody in this world. What's your take on that topic and that question? Because a lot of people could be like, it's done. Like, things are just going the wrong direction. But what do you share, and what do you want people to hear about male sexuality?
Yeah, a lot of what led me to write this book was the Me Too movement, and seeing and hearing all these stories being brought out, rightfully so. And I think in a healthy way for women to finally be able to kind of talk about this more openly is just the amount of harm that's done in the name of male sexuality in the culture. And I mean, from obviously, horror stories of sexual harm, sexual violation, but then even the simple, the daily catcalls or sexualizing that, sexualized comments that women suffer. I think there was a Harvard study that said 18 to 25-year-old women were asked, you know, unwanted sexual advances. How many of you have experienced that? And it was 90%. So 87%, I think. So essentially every woman has suffered unwanted sexual advances, meaning catcalls and sexualized comments and those sorts of things. I mean, you would wonder, and wow, is this just like, what's wrong with men, right? Do we give up? Do we just say, you know, boys will be boys? Now, obviously, as a Christian, knowing the story, the origin story of sexuality was the Garden of Eden. God made it good, blessed it. So I knew there had to be something like missing. It's not something we just say, let's just give up on men, but like, how do we find that heart again? Back to Peggy Orenstein's research, right? Like, how do we recover that heart and reconnect it? So that was the work that I'm doing. It's not fundamentally broken, but you're going to have to do some work to get that heart back, because so many men, again, sexuality is this thing that sort of operates over here, and it doesn't get talked about. It doesn't feel connected other than when you feel a desire for it. Yeah. But it lives in such silence and secrets for a lot of guys. So,
and there's so few voices that are speaking to it out of health, out of the God design, without shame or the unnecessary layers of things involved, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So
you know,
there's very, very few good guides, I would say.
Yeah, and that was certainly my experience as a man of like, gosh, you read a book like Every Man's Battle or something like that. Do you want me to talk about other books openly?
Yeah, sure, go for it.
Okay.
I mean, I had that one on my shelf. You know,
okay.
I dove into it as a teenager as well. Yeah.
And I mean, there's something good about a book like Every Man's Battle, in terms of just understanding, you know, how do I cope with lust? But there are other parts of it that are not good, because it scripts this idea again of like, man, you're just an animal with uncontrollable urges, and you're going to have to figure out how to be an animal with uncontrollable urges. And I think that just sets up such a bad script for men and for women then, because there's such a script for women of feeling obligated to help a man not lust, you know, if you're in marriage, you know, again, give him his dose of sex. And it just misses that poet-lover picture, again, of like Adam in the garden, Song of Songs.
Well, what I appreciate is in your writing, you peeled back the layers and you went to the difference of sensuality versus sexuality. And I think it's important for our audience to hear that, the way you broke it down. And in short, you said they're not exactly the same. So unpack that for us, because even from an early age, like, we're designed to be sensual, and people hear that word and all of a sudden they're like, you know, either blushing or they're leaning in of like, what does that mean? Or like, what are we talking about here? But sensuality versus sexuality, why is that so important for people to really understand the difference? Yeah.
You know, we do use them interchangeably, but sensuality is really just of the senses, right? It's your experience of your senses unto pleasure, I would say. So a good steak, a well-done steak, or you know, a good cigar. What makes a good cigar a good cigar? It's sensuality, right? It's how it smells. It's how it tastes, right? The texture of the smoke as you're smoking it. Like, all of that plays into, you know, oh, this is a good cigar versus, you know, something at the convenience store. Yeah. Or, you know, we have a friend, Jared, who at his graduation party, right? He smoked a bunch of meat for his son's graduation party. And I remember talking to him and saying like, man, this is really good. And he's like, it's okay. You know, and I was thinking like, oh, this is an aficionado now, right? Jared's become that, like, he knows when he's nailed it and when it's just a little off from what he could do, right? What is all of that in a man? Or a love of whiskey, right? Like, what makes a good whiskey a good whiskey? That's sensuality. Yeah. Or as I tell a story in the book, you know, I was elk hunting story of when I was out elk hunting and I missed a shot on an elk and was just overcome with like the lost opportunity, because it was archery. Yeah. And archery hunting for elk is very, very hard.
I just did my first season. I did not get out as much as I wanted, but it's not easy.
Yes. Yeah. So I actually had an opportunity and I missed, and I was just in the churn of that as I was hiking. We had a couple more days, my buddy and I, and But then there was this moment where we found some more elk and we were in the middle of them, and it was just a powerful experience. I didn't get a shot, but I sat back at one point because the sun was setting, and I'm listening to these elk bugle, and the beauty of the moment washed over me.
Yeah.
And I realized in that moment, that's what God had me there for. And I would have missed that if I was hauling an elk back, the meat back to camp. I would have missed that sunset and that beautiful moment. It just spoke to me again of like, I think God is resurrecting the lover in me, that poet lover in that moment, right? I'm out here as like the warrior, the armed, like...
Yeah, totally savage, like with a bow and arrow. And
get your meat, right? And take it back. And it was a powerful moment to realize like, oh, there are other parts of me God wants to resurrect and bring back alive. That's sensuality, right? How do you take in a beautiful sunset? Or how do you take in, your bride, the beauty of your bride? And here I'm not just talking about just visual, right? But the whole experience of a person that you have. Like you think of a good dancer, a good musician, right? That's all your senses.
Yeah, fly fishing,
right?
Yeah, I love it. And you've unpacked it's like children are extremely sensual. And I want to be clear here. We're talking about the senses. It's like they're so hypersensitive in a great way.
Right.
From an early age, it's part of the God design in our lives, right?
Right.
But then when we look and observe men, their hobbies or what helps them relax is typically something highly sensual. I feel like all the examples you just shared.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. Cigars on the back porch, right? With a fire, or, a shot of whiskey or something like that. Right. Or fly fishing or hunting. Right. It's all sensuality. Yeah. Children are not sexually awakened.
Yeah.
Happens at puberty. But children are highly sensual. If you listen to them just talk about their life, right? It's often through their senses. That was loud. This tastes good. I don't like that. This doesn't feel good, right? It's all sensual exploration of the world. And I think that's what they were made for. That's how we get embodiment. That's how we learn to trust our bodies through play and discovery and what we like and don't like. And that's sexuality is built on that. If it's healthy and alive in you, it's flowing out of your sensuality. It's how you fall in love.
Yeah, so I love it. So that's foundational, right, for all of us, like from a young age. And then you're saying we get into puberty, and then whole other chapters emerge. Yeah. I got to go to a workshop once with Dan Allender, along with some other friends that and it was funny, but like so gripping, because he started the session, mostly couples, and he's like, I just want to make it really clear to everybody that we are all sexual beings.
Yeah.
And it sounded so simplistic, so elementary. But then on the other hand, as he unpacked that, it's like, no, you have to understand like how God designed you. Of course, where we came from, but just understanding the nature of like the God design in us, and then the natural, healthy desires that he put into our lives, right? And so we've talked about sensuality, and then you go into sexuality, and like, what does that look like in the God design for men, right? And that's why we break this down, because there's often just confusion of like, oh, I'm not emotional, or I'm not this, or like, I'm not going to really invest time to build up towards a great sexual experience with my wife or whatnot. I'm just not like that. But they're sensual whether they realize it or not, right? And then the two intertwine as we get older, and then what we believe the beauty and the strength of marriage with a husband and wife, right? But what does that look like? Because you start to unpack the difference between that and then sexuality. So speak to that. And then also you get into, there's the mechanics of sex, but also the poetics of sex.
Yeah.
And so I think that's important for everybody to understand as well too. Because this book is less about the mechanics and more about the poetics and the heart.
Right. So I'm borrowing there a line from this writer, Esther Perel, who described the difference between the mechanics of sex and the poetics of sex. The mechanics being, how does the anatomy work? How does it fit together? Right? You figure that out pretty fast.
Yeah.
That's maybe the
fourth grade video from the teacher or whatever. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, with the basics.
Tab A, slot B, you figure it out. But the poetics of sex is actually the realm of desire. What's animating this moment of sexuality? And I think that's where there's such important work as men of understanding what's the script that's playing into this sexual moment for me. What's the romance? What's the story around it? All sexuality lives in a story, In other words, there was some researchers, Masters and Johnson, who discovered in the 60s the arousal cycle. So again, the mechanics side of things. They figured out that everybody travels through 4 stages in an arousal cycle in your body. You can't jump around, or you can't skip them, I should say. Like you have to go through these.
It's linear.
It's linear.
Yeah.
You go through these, and obviously you don't have to go through them. You might go through a couple, and then it will stop. But essentially, to have a sexual experience leading to orgasm, you go through these stages. It's physical. It's mechanical. But another researcher came along and said, "There's something missing here." And in other words, she was saying, "What starts this whole process in the body?" Right? There's nothing of the heart here that's in this script. And she talked about the realm of desire. Again, that the question is, how do you get to this point that you're actually traveling the arousal cycle? So again, the realm of desire and what's the heart behind it matters greatly. What are you showing up with? And I had a client say to me recently, he said, "I read your book, and this is a young man who is struggling with pornography use." And he said, "So I read your book, and, so I tried it the other day. I was looking at pornography, and I tried to take in," he's like, "I stopped in the middle of it, and I tried to take in the beauty of the performers that I was looking at, just taking in the fact that they're human beings. And it ruined the whole moment for me." And he said something, in other words, what this guy is naming is that moment, he was hot wiring his own sexual arousal cycle, but it had nothing to do with sensuality or beauty. Because as soon as he started to tune into that, it shut him down. Like more of his heart showed up. And he realized, like, this is not honoring to my body or these people.
His truer self showed up.
His truer self, right? Yeah. His heart. When he brought his heart to the moment, it killed that moment. But then he said to me, then I was at a concert a week later, and I was throwing something away in a trash can, and another concert goer, a woman, walked up and threw something away, and we started talking. And he said, I was able to take in the beauty of who this person was and realize, like, wow, there's such a depth when you bring your heart to a moment, how much more you can take in, how much more pleasure is possible, how much more relationship is possible, sensuality is possible. So that's what I'm inviting through this book is, how do you get that heart back and join it?
This episode is sponsored by Something Blue 30A. Looking for the perfect vacation spot to disconnect from everything, put your feet in the softest sand, and enjoy a fresh, renovated 2-bedroom, 2.5-bath townhouse right on the beach in my favorite place in the world? Well, 30A is situated in the Panhandle of Florida, and I'd love for you to check out Something Blue 30A on Instagram and make it the perfect place for your next vacation.
So, Sam, I love this because you're talking about when we really bring our heart, or like the way God designed us to look at sexuality, how we view women, how we view our wives. When we do it wholeheartedly, there's so much more. It's so much healthier, right? I want you to speak to the difference of the concept of awe and the concept of lust, because you break that down really well. What do you want our listeners to better understand?
Yeah, so what I say in the book is, I feel like the goal of your sexuality is awe. Whether you're single, married, dating, whatever stage of relationship you are, whether you're sexually active or not, I believe the goal of your sexuality is awe. And awe is this studied emotion. It's, researchers call it an emotion on the upper reaches of pleasure, on the edge of fear.
That's so good.
Yeah, I love that. It's so poetic. And yet, somebody might say, well, fear? How would fear be a good thing in sexuality, right? Wouldn't that be everything that's wrong with sexuality? And what they mean there, or what that would mean in terms of sexuality, is that something's being risked, right? That it's not just a cheap thrill, right? When you think of like somebody looking at pornography, there's not much asked of them, right? There's not really much risk, maybe getting caught, I guess, right? But there's not really much of their heart on the line. But you think of like disrobing with another individual in a relationship, or having a deep relationship with your wife, and the vulnerability of connection that's inherent in that. And I'm always amazed as a marriage therapist how much even the risk of desire, sexual desire in marriage, in long-term marriage, still feels vulnerable. And I would say by design, it should feel like something's on the line a little bit, right? Like I'm being vulnerable. I'm showing up emotionally. That's the risk, right? Not a danger risk of harm, but other than like I'm being vulnerable and I'm asking you to care about my heart. But then obviously on the upper reaches of pleasure. So you think about, awe experiences outside of sexuality, like going to the zoo and seeing the lion behind the 1-inch thick glass, right? And you're like, whoa. I mean, the design of a lion and the beauty of a lion, and yet the power. And there's on the upper reaches of pleasure on the edge of fear, or standing at the rim of the Grand Canyon, right? On the upper reaches of pleasure on the edge of fear. Meaning there's something that's overpowering about it. I think about the first time I asked my wife out. It was on the upper reaches of pleasure and definitely on the edge of fear.
I love the story of how your friend compelled you to ask the question before he embarrassed you in front of Amanda. So.
Yes, I had a friend that had to essentially haze me into finally asking my wife out because I was too much in the fear. And I just needed to, take up courage and go do it, go ask her out. And I finally did. Obviously worked out. But, I think of that experience as like, that was an experience of awe. Like I was overcome with her and actually approaching her and risking it. There's something on the line, my heart getting rejected. Ultimately, like my life, no. So again, we're not talking about, dangerous risk here. But you think about like hookup culture, which in research, again, by Peggy Orenstein and other writers, would say it's all driven by alcohol. It's essential that they're numb because they need to numb out
the feeling and the connection,
right? and the risk, right? Because there's no awe in it. There's not much at stake, and that would be lust, right? Lust is all pleasure. It's a taking. It's a trying to strip out the risk part of it.
Yeah,
like nothing's on the line for you. You're just taking.
No responsibility.
Right? It's just all about your own pleasure. So switching, and I would also say, lust tends to have a more kind of mutilating quality to it. It's seeing body parts. It's not taking in the whole person, right? We think about like when the awe you feel for, I had a friend that was saying he liked watching Caitlin Clark back when she was playing for Iowa in the March Madness. And he was saying like, I'm so drawn to watch her. And he stepped back and said, like, I don't think it's lust, but what is this thing I'm feeling? Like, she's amazing. And I said, I think that's awe, right? You're feeling how amazing it is to see this human being in her glory,
right?
In her fitness and her finesse on the court. That's awe.
Yeah.
And I think that's the basis for awe, even in long-term marriage, that you are approaching your partner. There's a writer, Emily Nagoski, that says, your partner, I love this line, your partner is not an animal to be hunted for sustenance, but a beauty keeper whose depths are infinite. Meaning there's always more mystery to your partner, even in long-term marriage, that's worth exploring. They're not sustenance, right? Like you have a need and you need it met. But again, that poet lover is what I'm inviting out in a man.
Yeah. I love how you reframed like what true awe is, and then how you really want people to see beyond lust and beyond the entrapment of that, because it is so detrimental for men, for all of us, and in our society. And there's too many men just stuck in the cycle of not living out the fullness of who they could be or who God designed them to be, whether they're single, they're married, they have a partner. So speak to that a little bit more, because then as it goes further in the book, you start to unpack a pathway of how people can break through that trap, break through to deeper levels of true intimacy and so forth. But again, with awe, it's when you have your kids at the park and the sunset, and you guys love Ute Valley, we do too, take our boys there. It's just such a cool place right here in Colorado Springs. Or the elk hunts as well. I've had some near Uray, and they're coming out of the woods and the sun is setting. There's nothing like it. And we're seeing the beauty of God in nature, or we're seeing it in our wife, or we're seeing it in a basketball player living out their fullness of the God design and their developed skills, right? Yeah. So with the topic of like awe versus lust, I love how you broke it down and you helped people see through it, and then also move into like, what's a better way to look at purity and a better way to look at innocence? So speak to that, because I mean, we grew up, I think we both grew up in the 90s, right. At least, for us, we were churchgoers, and we saw the good, the bad, and the ugly of probably well-intended people trying to help young men. But now, a couple decades later, we can look back and know, like, oh, they weren't telling the full story. Like, there was things missing. And I've just been intrigued with that. And your writing has inspired me to have better conversations with my boys, as I have in the last couple of years. I got another conversation coming up with our 9-year-old soon. And so I'd love to have you unpacked, like, what does it look like to walk in maintaining innocence and maintaining purity? And how do we do that even in a better way than the messages we received, like in purity culture in the 90s?
Yeah. I hope it's abundantly clear by now, but you were made to be moved. And I think that's the part of purity culture that was left out, is actually you're made to be moved by beauty. And that's not a bad thing in you. That's not lust inherently. For you to feel, being overcome by another person, the beauty of another woman, that's not lust inherently. It could become that if you go there, but you were made to be moved. Again, you're a lover. You're a poet lover.
You have a heart. You were designed to appreciate awe, right? Yeah.
And I think evil, the realm of evil comes early in all of our stories to bring shame to sexuality. So I think most people, like, where does that poet lover go? Where is the heart? If every man has this heart, where does it go? How did we lose it, right? I would say evil comes early to try to join shame to our sexuality. And so do I think, pornography is just a battle with lust? It's not. It's actually far more a battle with shame and how we feel trapped in our own story of shame, and how evil comes to tell a different story than the lover's story. So, a lot of guys I sit with in counseling, they'll come in and, we'll start to talk about their lives or their sexual story, their sexual formation, and they'll say, well, there's some weird things that happened when I was a kid. And that word weird is often the word that they use to kind of enter in to talk about their story. And it's just how they know to hold the shame. Most guys feel for parts of their story like they're dirty or something's wrong with them or they're perverted, right? Like all these accusations that evil wants to give to you against your heart as the poet lover. So what's the other name evil has given to you? That tends to be what gets acted out in perpetual, like, pornography struggles or sexual acting out, is actually you're reenacting stories of shame in your life. And that might sound complex at first, but what I'm just inviting you to see is it's probably more about shame than it is about lust. You're trying to relieve some sort of shame in your life. And it's not just an urge in your body that's taking you there. It's the accusation of evil, that shame accusation that's taking you there.
Yeah, against your heart and soul. And for those watching, like Mindy and I, this concept of like the evil, like the enemy of our hearts and souls will come to try to bring shame, which then makes you afraid or fear. And then what do we try to do? Then we try to control the situation, right? So we were equipped with this kind of framework years ago, and it's helped us so much. That's why I want to pause. It's like shame, fear, control, shame, fear, control.
Yeah, so well said.
And this cycle can grip people either in sexuality or just other things in life, like relationship with mother-in-law isn't great, right? Or show up to family events and you feel ashamed of like what you've accomplished in life or not. It can apply to so many things, but that shame, fear, control cycle applies so dead on here, right? So back to the topic of like purity, because I think it was challenging for guys in our generation. And again, if you're watching this is newer to you, like if folks grew up in a church, there was this movement of like, be sexually pure, wait until you get married to have sex, which I believe in is great. I think it helps with so much freedom and preserves healing in life, right? But there were bracelets and there were books and there were sayings and all these things and like true love waits. And again, really well intended, and I think it helped some people. But then what you're saying is there was layers to it that brought shame, or there was layers to it that
Yes.
didn't paint the bigger picture. And what we try to talk about in our family is not just the don'ts or the negative of what you should not do, but talk about the positives, or like what is the reward for doing something the Jesus way, or like a healthier way, or something that's proven over time to lead to life and to freedom. So I think you unpack some of that of like what could have been a better story, or what now is a better narrative, right?
Right. Yeah. Purity. Obviously, Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, don't lust. So there is this call to purity, but it was set up as first purity was equated with virginity, and then a kind of hyper virginity, which is like, don't even think about it, right? Like, don't even have the thoughts of sexual thoughts, which is, it just doesn't leave room for sexual formation or sexual conversations about sexuality, or being moved. Again, you're suspicious of everything that's happening in your body. And so it made purity the goal, right? If you get purity, then you're good.
Meanwhile, the 17-year-old is like, why do I feel this way on the inside?
Right. Yeah. Right. And there's no room to have that conversation about like, whoa, what do I feel in my body when I see a beautiful girl at school, and being able to talk about that or be curious about sexuality. And so it was pushed into the shadows and kind of left again then with this idea of like, you're dirty if you didn't stay pure, right? Whether that was lost your virginity or just had sexual experiences that felt like sexual, right? Like that, then again, like then there's this sense of like you're less than, or you're dirty, or you're damaged goods. And there was a lot of scripting of that. Like you're like duct tape, right? That loses the stickiness, and
you did life out of order or whatever.
Right. And you can't get that back. And I'm here to say, and I think it's the message of Jesus, which is that you can recover your innocence. That's the gift we get from him. And innocence is not naivete, right? It's not that you forget everything you've seen, because I know people that would say, well, I've seen too much. I know too much, right? I've suffered too much. I can't become innocent again. But innocence is this way of experiencing life, which is that return to awe and wonder, right? You think of like a child on Christmas Day, right? Or wow, being overcome with some powerful experience.
They don't wake up thinking, I really have to control my emotions today, right? On Christmas.
Right. That's innocence, right? Being able to receive things with like a full body, wow, an experience and celebration.
Yeah. I love that. So that's where, somebody's halfway through your book, they're like, okay, where's this going? But the second half is so vital. And that's why I encourage people to check this out, because you start to unpack sexual aliveness and innocence can be attained again.
Yes.
For someone who experienced that shame or guilt, or they're just frustrated with like part of their story.
Yeah.
Right. So speak to that a bit more. And then also the kindness of God. So again, we want to encourage people, if they don't know the one true God and his son Jesus, but like that is a game changer of understanding how we're designed and how there's mercy and grace for us in our lives because of what Jesus did. But the kindness of God, the ancient wisdom of the Bible tells us, is what leads people to turn their life around. It's not the anger or the shame or the guilt tripping. And I've reflected on that a lot, being a father of 4 kids, where especially this year, I'm like, how do I show up with more kindness in helping coach and parent my kids in the moments where I feel furious? Like, are you kidding me? I just told you to put the white socks on, not the French fry socks, because the school is going to get you in trouble for violating uniform code. Might have happened this morning. However, I've just realized what leads me to change? What leads me to be a better man?
Yeah.
And it's when a gray hair or someone further along comes along with kindness or insight, right?
Yeah.
And helps coach you in a better way. And I love that the scriptures show us that it's the kindness of God that leads us to repentance or turning our lives around to a better way. So speak to that and kind of as this whole story of what God can do in and through our lives, whether we've had a great history or with something like we don't want to think about or open up our hearts to very often.
Yeah. I love that you're sharing that story. I had one on Tuesday of when my son spilled the coffee that I had let him have in the morning all over his book bag right as we're walking out the door, and that moment of frustration of how do you cope with that moment? And especially because it's an accident for my son, and he's in his own shame about it, and It's recognizing that the only path out of shame that's actually healthy is kindness. Kindness, shame in the body is actually a terror. It registers in the body as terror, as threat, and your nervous system goes into fight or flight. The only way to stop that process is to experience kindness, whether that's kindness to yourself, ultimately, eventually, but also first and foremost, as you're saying, from God, from somebody else that's able to be kind to you. I'm convinced that Jesus, especially in the area of sexuality, that Jesus had his most tender, slow, gentle conversations, kind conversations with people that were caught in sexual brokenness, sexual oppression, sexual sin, right? He was so kind to them. And I believe he has that same posture for us. So what's the way out of shame, sexual shame, to recover aliveness? There's only one path, and that is having to be kind, to receive and take a risk on really the kindness of God, and then to be able to sit with your story differently. So, oh yeah, there's some weird things that happened when I was a kid. Maybe there's parts of your story that you've never talked about with somebody. Being able to open that up, that's a kindness to be able to give a voice to those things. So starting to recognize places that you need kindness. Let me pause there.
It's okay.
Trying to think where to go from there. We wanted to go to...
Well, I want to be sensitive to time for you too. And thanks, Liz, for editing this. I think from the kindness...
I've got a few minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would just speak to how guys like you and I can turn the tide as we have better conversations with our sons.
Yeah.
Or, mothers with daughters and families, et cetera. So that we look back and there's a new generation of a more complete conversation.
That's good. What I mean? Okay. Yeah.
And then I might ask you anything else that people don't ask you about that you'd love to share. Is this important? And we'll wrap up. But,
okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So kindness of God kind of and then I'll ask you, how can we pass that on to our kids?
Yeah. Okay. Sexuality of all areas in our life needs such kindness and tenderness. So, you think about even just having a conversation with your kids about sexuality. And I think about conversations I would have wanted in my own story, right? That kindness is so essential as we learn to embody sexuality. It's easy to think of sexuality as something that deserves anger and harshness and how could you screw it up, right? In fact, I tell a story in the book of when I was caught at 19 by my mom looking at the internet search history, discovered that I had looked at pornography at 19.
I think this is so brave because you've shared this before the book and then also in here too. But it was a life-changing moment for you, right?
It was. And, because here I am, 19 and struggling looking at pornography, and I get caught. And you think oh my gosh, the worst moment of my life, right? But the gift of it was... And it was terrifying and
because the
overwhelming.
Family was what's happening with the computer, or what's going on here, right?
Right. So it's in our family room, and my brother and dad are watching golf, and my mom is trying to help my sister do a project for school. She sees this internet search history and is confused, hey, do you know what this is about, Sam? So in front of my whole family, I say, yeah, it's me. I've been looking at pornography. And everybody in my family turns to look at me. And it felt like even the golfer on TV's dropped his club and what? And it was an overwhelming experience. It was also a very relieving experience because I was actually very terrified of the struggle in my life, of where it was going and where does this end and what happens next. And so I kind of fled the scene and went to my bedroom, and thankfully my mom came. And again, that was awkward and so uncomfortable. The gift she gave me was, would you like to see a counselor? She asked. And I said, that would be great.
So she led with a good question.
Yes. And she didn't roar at me. She didn't shame me. She actually joined me to get me help. And knowing, too, that it was probably better to talk to a man. So I went and saw a man as a counselor. And again, that's not a given that a mother can't talk to her sons. She could. But in this case, it was a gift. And I went to see this counselor, and he was a Christian counselor. I expected him to roar at me, like, again, like really stick it to me, like, you need to stop doing this, and what's wrong with you, and berate me. And he just stayed so kind and curious about my story, asked me questions, what was leading me to this. There's always a story. It's never just an urge in itself. And he started to make space for that. By the end of that first session, I was in tears, feeling like, what did you just do to me? Right? Like, what just happened?
The superpower.
The superpower. And what was the superpower? It was his kindness. That something about that like opened up, and I started to connect with all the deeper things that were actually driving me to seek some sort of comfort or relief in my body through pornography use. That changed my life. It was profound. That's the kind of kindness we're talking about. And you may need, the kindness of a counselor, conversations with God, conversations with yourself in a journal, starting to be brave with honoring some of your story. And then from there, being able to let that then flow to other people, like your own kids, and being able to be more open and kind to them when they're, in sexual struggle in all of life, but sexual curiosity and conversations as they learn to embody it.
Yeah, I love how you advise, and it's helped my conversations with a couple of my boys already. But it's not just the mechanics with the sex talk.
Yes.
Like it's how can we pause and unpack the matters of the heart, the matters of the God design of awe and beauty. Yeah. And that those desires inside of us aren't in and of themselves bad, right? And just too often, like you opened up with today, people have a very incomplete or short or abbreviated or disrespectful story of what's unpacked and explained to them. So I just want to say thank you. And for those viewing and watching, I can't say enough about Sam's work, his writing. The Sex Talk You Never Got is phenomenal. It's called Reclaiming the Heart of Masculine Sexuality. And so I want to encourage you to check this out. Sam, where could they learn more or find out more info about you?
Yeah. So my website, Sam Jolman, JOLMAN.com. My publisher's actually offering a BOGO copy of the book. So you can go claim that there for into the future. They haven't told me when that expires. So I also have a free ebook that you can get as a purchase bonus, and on how to give a sex talk to your children. It's a short little ebook. And I'm also on Substack. So would love to, I do ongoing writing there and host conversations on topics that I write about. Would love to see you there and meet you there.
So samjolman.com. You can find the book, the BOGO, and the ebook, correct?
Yep.
And then Substack. If you're not on Substack, there's your good reason to start right there. I promise you, his writings will be worth it and a blessing to you. So Sam, again, I want to say thank you. Again, I mean that you are a man who gets to the heart of the matter and reminds other men why we need to be mindful and open and live to the fullness of what God has for us. And so this is a really different episode today, if you haven't caught on. Why? Well, when at the show, we talk about how to create a life worth celebrating. And sexuality and the beauty of all of this is a big part of that. Whether you want to admit it or not, it is such a massive part of our lives. So again, I'm so honored to have Sam on here today, because that's a real thing we want to see in people's lives. We're celebrating better understanding, better knowledge, be better equipped to live in the fullness of how God designed them. And so thank you. Honored to have you here today. So we're, as our tradition is, we're going to do a cheers. What is your favorite drink that we're having here today?
This is black coffee with 1 sugar.
Right on. I did sand sugar on my side, but I'm a black coffee guy as well too. So grateful to have you. Everybody check out Sam's work, samjolman.com. We're going to do a whole other episode maybe sometime on elk hunting and beauty and the power of that here in Colorado. We could talk for hours, but honored to have you, everybody. Thank you for joining us on the Something New Show. Be sure to check out Sam's book. Also, if you comment on Instagram as well as subscribe to our YouTube channel, we're going to get you a free copy of an autographed copy of Sam's book. So again, comment on the Something New Show Instagram as well as subscribe. Be in touch with us, and you'll be in the runnings for an autographed copy of his book. We'd love to get that your way. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time on the Something New Show. Cheers.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe to the show, rate, review, and share with a friend. Also, follow The Something New Show on Instagram and Facebook. If you want a fuller experience, watch the show on YouTube to help you create a life worth celebrating.